We'll be just giving a couple minutes before we get started, maybe within 5 minutes or so. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Moon Young Lee. I'm the team co-leader of CUV. Today we'll be talking about acquiring sponsorship. This week is the third round of seminars. Thank you, everyone, for following closely. We've had a couple hundred views so far in the previous seminars, and we're really excited to see how we can actually discuss all kinds of topics with other teams, share information, and we're really hoping that this will be able to be used to help other teams so that we can see a lot of teams in RoboSub competition perform phenomenally. So topic for today, we had a little bit of change in our planning. We'll be doing acquiring sponsorship first at 11 a.m. and the electrical system design will be following an hour later at 12 p.m. Please note that the starting from now, the timeline or the time zone difference will take effect due to daylight savings in the Eastern time zone. So that means an hour has been shifted earlier for every webinar that will follow. Please make note of those changes. Okay, with that, I guess we'll get started with the acquiring sponsorship webinar. So of course, again, this webinar, the whole purpose is to help other teams and also to just share information that could be remotely possible to any teams. So that means if you have any questions, please email us. My email is ml634@Cornell, and you can send emails to this address anytime during the webinar, and I'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes towards the end addressing any of the questions, concerns, or follow-ups that you have. And in the case that you're not actually watching this webinar live and have any other questions later on, feel free to send out an email. We're really here to help, and we welcome any kind of emails. And also, we'll be, for this seminar specifically, we'll be sharing a little bit about our sponsorship and how we approach just developing relationships with corporates. So that means there's going to be a lot of materials like the sponsorship packet, our websites, our banners, team apparel and stuff. And all those information can be found on our website. And also, if you have any questions regarding these materials, again, feel free to email me at ml634. All right, so the roadmap of this webinar, just quickly, it will probably take 25 to 30 minutes. We'll start out by covering the general information. What is sponsorship? What does it look like? And how can it help me, in bringing forward my team? And second, we'll be going into the before contact stage. If you have a list of sponsors that you want and you know exactly what you want from them, what are the things that you need to prepare in order to make a good contact? Because the worst thing you want to do is contact a sponsor without being prepared. And third, we'll be breaking down the process, this intimidating process of students approaching corporates, experts at this field. It could be pretty intimidating, and we want to break it down into bite pieces, chunks, so that it's manageable and it's very clear and something that hopefully could impact or help you guys in the future. And lastly, we'll be covering the afterwards process. What this will cover is probably how to follow up on sponsors, not just that 3 to 5 days after email, oh, thank you, kind of follow up, but more about how you can actually develop a system on the future if you want to develop more of a sustainable relationship with companies, and also if you want to expand the horizon of companies that you can reach out to. That's also another thing that we want to be talking about. So let's get started. Sponsorship 101. Basically, what is a sponsorship? And the definition I was able to find is that it is a form of advertising in which a company pays an associate with certain projects, teams, or events. So for us, it would be teams, student teams, and this payment doesn't necessarily have to be money. It can be expressed in many different shapes or forms. And actually, I found that money sponsorship is actually, or monetary sponsorship is probably the most difficult to acquire. The ones that we tend to, that turns out to yield most success and is probably most favorable for the companies as well, is probably the in-kind donations or the discounts on a certain certain part or service. And let's see, we can even talk about some, I guess, discounts. Most likely all companies have some sort of educational discount towards universities or student teams. They kind of range to maybe like 10% or so. If you're able to, reach out to them and really express your need for a particular product, maybe they can even strike you a better deal, maybe 25 to 50% off on a special hardware. But preferably, I guess the ideal case scenario is if you were able to acquire a gift in kind donation, which is basically when a company gives you, say, a sensor or a thruster for free, and it's a generous donation basically. And the next thing is why. Why do we care about sponsorships? And this can be answered in two folds. First, in terms of the students aspect, and the second, in terms of the company's aspect. Let's tackle the students aspect first, because I think that's much easier. As you guys can all agree, we are a student team, and a student team always need money. We're poor. Just because universities can only give you so much money, and building a vehicle, especially an autonomous underwater, and it requires not only a lot of time, effort, and planning, but realistically, it requires a lot of money as well. So I don't think anyone needs convincing that teams need money. But the second aspect, which is why would a company ever want to sponsor a team? And I think a lot of new teams have difficulty understanding this, but companies actually have a huge benefit as well in sponsoring student teams. And that can be expressed in terms of name branding for the company, or it could be possible recruiting opportunities, or this is also another thing that people kind of don't really think about, but when companies do sponsor a student team or any kind of university nonprofit organization, they do get charitable deduction on their taxes through the IRS, which is a huge incentive for companies to really support nonprofit teams like student organizations. This picture that I have is the results of the last year competition in 2014. And the reason I posted this was because I really want to emphasize the power of acquiring sponsorships. If you can see the first place through fifth place, these are all successful teams, of course, because they placed in the competition. But it's not just, they're not successful just because they have bright students or they've been participating in a long time, but they're successful because they were able to acquire a lot of funding. And one way to kind of see that is all these teams have DVLs, Doppler velocity logs. And that's a very expensive material, probably one of the most expensive sensors on our vehicle. And that goes to say, if you are building an AUV, your AUV can be so good, just as good as how much funding, how much products you put on there. If you don't have the resources to really enhance your AUV, then clearly there's going to be some divide between how well your AUV can perform, regardless of how talented your student members are. So again, in order to really bridge that gap between and really make it a fair competition ground for all teams, I think is to really have a good good set of resources for all teams. And because all universities can't really support 100% of our funds, the way teams can really do that and kind of unbridge all that disparity gap between the teams is through sponsorship. And I think that's one thing I really want to emphasize, that sponsorship, if you guys haven't really acquired as much as other teams, I really want you guys to really strive to be as well supported by companies as other teams. With that being said, this sponsorship webinar is probably going to be aimed towards, let's say, early developing teams with maybe less than 3 to 4 years of experience. And also, I tend to realize that high school teams, and I know there's a couple middle school teams as well, they don't really have as much sponsorships as university teams. So that's basically who I'm envisioning this webinar to be targeted towards. So I guess if you are a team with much more experience, the sponsorship webinar could be a little something that you probably are well familiar with. And let's talk about how the how part of the sponsorship. How do you get funded? And now that you understand the importance of getting sponsorship. And the biggest answer to the how question is basically by taking an initiative. You're not going to get, a company's not going to come to you and throw you money or throw you a sensor. Well, that does happen a couple of times, but it's very rare. I'd say 99% of the time, if you are getting a sponsor from a company, it's by students actively seeking out companies, whether it's in the competition site, whether it's in your school's career fair, where a lot of companies do come to seek out recruiting and develop relationships. That's also another prime opportunity to really take action, be bold, and really reach out to companies. So I guess that's what I meant to really say when I put the word opportunistic, because getting sponsorships is basically developing a relationship, not with just a person, but with a company. And relationships just doesn't happen by sitting around and waiting for it and wishing for it to happen. But relationships happen when people are active, they're well prepared, they know exactly what they want in this relationship, and they take the initiative. So that's the how part of the sponsorship. And all these aspects, of course, will be delving into much more in detail later on as well in the webinar. And the next part of the Sponsorship 101 is covering the who. Of course, these can be companies, but if you break it down, it can be generalized into hardware and software companies. But not only that, you could also reach out to distribution companies. So for example, if you want a soldering station from Weller company, Weller only doesn't actually, it's very hard to actually acquire a soldering station from Weller. But what they do instead is they have a very good deal with a lot of other distribution vendors who can potentially distribute all their soldering stations. So it's also a good way to acquire, if your end goal is to acquire those soldering stations, you don't necessarily have to go to the manufacturer of that company. You can also acquire that soldering station through DigiKey, MCM, or a lot of other distribution channels. And also, I'm pretty sure most teams have their biggest sponsor as their team or as their university, just because a lot of universities tend to support their own teams. And lastly, the when. This is often neglected, and I think it does benefit you to kind of just know that a lot of sponsors are more active in the beginning of the design cycle. And what I mean by that is in the beginning of the academic year, around maybe say July to September, even maybe late October, is when they're available or they're more willing to sponsor a team or organization than say later towards March. And the reason is because companies do tend to allocate a certain amount of pool that they want to, they're willing to donate to certain teams or organizations. And if 10 or say X amount of teams have already fulfilled or completely drew for that set amount of pool, if another really great teams comes on later on and they ask for support, they're not going to have the money. So I guess it's good to be early, and early is in the beginning of the design cycle. And also, if you need something on your team for, and it's a very integral part of your vehicle design, then you really need to be active and start early, because this developing a relationship it doesn't happen overnight. Just because you want a sensor or say this sonar or this thruster on your vehicle today doesn't mean that you're going to send an email and magically they're going to send it to you by tomorrow or even the next week. This takes time, because it's just naturally developing relationships. And again, developing a relationship does not happen overnight. So this is a way for me to kind of shameless plug our sponsors, and a way for us to kind of thank our sponsors, because you can't really do a acquiring sponsorship webinar without thanking our sponsors. So this is a couple of these sponsors that we have right now, or have supported us in the past. And one thing I've kind of found is that if you are well developed and if you have already a lot of sponsors, it's easier for that team to continue getting support from other companies, because basically the more companies are supporting you, it kind of serves to validate your team. Because if you have 10 companies that have already sponsored you, the 11th team might be much more willing to sponsor you, because they understand that, oh, this team has some credibility because 10 other sponsors have already supported them. So again, if you're a very early stage team, or if you're a high school team with not that many sponsors, it is a little bit more difficult, but it's okay. That's what this webinar is going to cover a lot about. And hopefully by the end of this 20-30 minutes, you'll be much more prepared to go out and tackle some sponsorship opportunities. So what can sponsorship look like? Very basically, they can be broken down into two layers. First is the in-kind donations. I briefly mentioned that it can be in terms of products or services. Products will be actual hardware. Say, for example, again, if you want a thruster from Video Ray, and services will be more like if you need some licensings for Eagle, CAD, or SolidWorks. Those annual license will be services. Or for example, if you need to get your board printed, you send it to Advanced Circuits and they give you a significant discount, or maybe if you're lucky, they print your boards or manufacture your boards for free. Those will be services. And of course, there's a lot of products and services involved in building an AUV. So it really depends on what your team needs. That leading into having specific products. So if you're asking for a sponsorship or if you're asking for in-kind donation, it's important that you don't just say, hey, we're this team and we're asking you to help. But it's very important to be specific in your approach, as in, we're this team, we're doing this implementation this year, and in order to accomplish this, we need your X component. And then for a sponsorship opportunity, or I guess in terms of the company, that is very clear, logical, and it's convincing. And it's very easy for them to support those kind of teams. But also keep in mind that when you ask for X, that you will get Y, or you might even get something completely different. So when you're asking, keep in mind to be very flexible, because you never know how the sponsorship is going to turn out. The second part of what sponsorships can look like is the monetary donation. They can actually, this is a little difficult just because companies, if you are trying to ask companies for money, then there's much more, I guess, logistics involved, as in you need to be much more convincing in terms of how you're going to allocate or how you're going to budget the X amount of money you're asking for. And also, another tricky part is if you're a university team, you need to make sure that your university doesn't already receive a significant amount of monetary funds from this company. Because the last thing you want to happen is, say your team reaches out to this company, asks for maybe $1,000, and they say yes, which is really great. But then what could end up backfiring is that could kind of eat away from the funds that they use to support your university. Um, Basically, that means your university is going to be very unhappy with your team, and that's something that we don't really want to have. It's a lot of headaches. And I guess the last slide for me in terms of the getting started section is, just do it. And your encouraging quote to kind of think about is that $17 billion are spent on companies in the United States to sponsor individuals, teams, or organizations. So that's a lot of money. $17 billion are out there, and this is an annual significant figure. And basically, wouldn't you want to be part of this $17 billion pool? So with that said, really act early, plan ahead, and just take the initiative, and it will happen. So let's get into the before contact stage. This is going to be kind of talking about what to prepare in order to get a successful sponsorship. So before you even think about reaching out to a sponsor, it is important to know what you need. So basically, this can happen if you're a team leader or if you're a sub-team leader. Create a well-documented or well-systemized kind of, say, like a spreadsheet or whatnot, and share it with your sub-team leaders. And basically, call it a wish list of what you guys need for this academic year, or maybe even 2-year design cycle. Say, this is the design that we have. What are the things that we need in order to accomplish this design? Think about what you can afford on your own in terms of your own budget, and think about what are not within your resources. So once you have a very well documented wish list, then I would say take that to the next stage and assign a point of contact to each item, to each member on your team. It doesn't mean that everyone on the team has to be working, has to be a point of contact, but it just means that someone is responsible for making this happen. So if you have 10 things on your wish list, it just means that someone is responsible for reaching out and taking an initiative. Because the last thing, and it could very easily be that you have this wish list that's really nice and it's going to really take your vehicle to the next level. But if you don't have a person that's responsible for making it happen, then it just becomes something in your Excel sheet that no one really takes action on. And then that's delays on delays. And then later on, you'll maybe not have that item, or you'll just have to pay for that on your own. And that's difficult. So what to prepare when you're reaching out to a company is do your research. And this is kind of linking back to what I was saying before. Did your school already contact this company? If so, there's a couple things that you can conclude from this. That means your school already has a developed relationship with this company. You could either utilize this, or you could not utilize it and not do your research and harm this relationship. So just be careful. You could use this information to your benefit. And are there now that you've kind of created a wish list, know which companies that you want to reach out to, you kind of get a feel of, are there any alumni that were previously on your team that are in these companies? If so, that's great. That's pretty much a foothold into this company. And basically, it's much easier to develop a relationship with someone you already know, or have some sort of ties to, rather than a complete stranger. And of course, it doesn't just have to be an alumni. It could be a family member or a relative of a team member. That's also great as well. And while I was reading through a couple articles about how companies really felt about teams or organizations reaching out to them for um, sponsorships, the two words I was really able to that constantly recurred was the word impeccable and concise. Basically, they don't want to see any emails asking for help if there are some flaws or if it's sloppy or if it just doesn't make sense. And also if it's long and not concise, that's something that companies really don't want to read. So basically, how do you develop I guess, an email or a phone call, or how do you approach a company and what do you say to them? And the things that you're really going to need, and you're going to have to, your style best, so work around it. But really at the core, things that you need to address are who you are as a team, why you need it for this year. So you're, you know, doing a new design and this sensor or this, I don't know, license is very integral to your design. Tell them why you need it and how it's going to advance your vehicle. If you have this vision in mind, how them supporting you can help you accomplish this. And of course, be very specific again about what you're asking for. And very at the end, you should also remind them or let them know there are a lot of benefits about sponsoring your team. And again, it could be very quickly, whether it's a lot of exposure of their team logo, brands, could be some recruitment opportunities. All this will be explained a little bit more about in detail later on. So when you're reaching out to companies, there are a couple other things that you could prepare other than those four core things. Supplementary materials could be either a sponsorship packet. So the picture over here is our sponsorship packet, or the front page and the back page of the sponsorship packet. But basically, it's to cover what your team is about. It's a quick glimpse for a potential sponsor to look through, and it covers all those four core things that I was talking about: who you are, why you need it, what your team does, vision, and basically benefits of how a company may, what a company may gain out of sponsoring you. And of course, in your sponsorship packet, a key thing is to lay it out very clear of different levels of sponsorship. So I know a lot of teams have platinum, diamond, gold, bronze, silver. They have different levels of sponsorship depending on how much they support you. Another supplementary material that's helpful to have is a team video. I know all teams have their team videos because that's a requirement for the competition. Whether you use that or something else, it's your discretion. And again, for team website, it's also kind of helpful to have, just because if your sponsor is interested, they do want to know a little bit more about your team. That's all conveyed in your team website, so that's helpful. So next part is, who do you approach? So say you have a specific company in mind and you know exactly what product you want, and who do you send an email to or who do you call? And basically, these are the bullet points of people that you can contact, starting with the most likely and probably the best option to the worst options on the bottom. So first person that you really want to contact is, again, any representative of that company with a personal tie to you. So again, if it's an alumni or a family member in your team, that's probably the most likely to bring success or yield fruit. The second is probably the marketing department, just because they're getting paid to handle these kind of things. So they're the people who's actually responsible. So they are the people you should really target. Otherwise, if you can't find those information online, you could probably target public relations or kind of community public affairs as well. But that's most likely, if you do contact them, they'll probably forward you to someone else. So it's mostly the marketing department that you really want to really shoot for. And the fifth option is the general support email address, such as info@somecompany.com or tech support at. These companies or these addresses, if you can't find anything else, most likely there will be this information provided. But again, if you contact this address, most likely what's going to end up happening is they're going to be passed along to their higher chain of commands. And once it keeps getting forwarded to upper level, to another upper level, to the right person at the end, that's more channels that your email might get lost. And also, I'm pretty sure info@somecompany.com is is very vague, and they get all kinds of emails, probably hundreds of thousands of emails every day. So I almost kind of think of it as like a black hole, as in if I send an email, I expect that it's going to be there. I expect that maybe like 10% of the time they're probably going to respond. So it doesn't have very high success rate. And lastly, CEOs and directors, you can probably, it's unlikely, but you can still find their information online through LinkedIn or whatnot. And they're probably just as, they're very busy. Their job is not to decide or even, I guess, interact with student teams to offer sponsorship. So they're really not the right person to contact. All right, so now that we covered a little bit about the before contact stage, we'll be moving into the actual contact part of the sponsorship. Again, this could be divided into either email, or it could be through phone calls, or it could either be through personal interaction, say during the competition site or during a career fair when companies come to recruit your students at a university. I tend to lean towards email just because we have a lot of supplementary materials to provide, such as a sponsorship packet, team video, and also a website. And it's very hard to convey that through a phone call or just in person. So emails tend to work really well for me. Again, when you're sending out an email, be very clear, concise, and very specific. Usually when you send out an initial email, you'll probably have to follow up within 3 to 5 days if you don't get a response. Another thing that actually really works well is if you initially send out an email with all that information and with the supplementary materials. When you follow up within 3 to 5 days, it's actually a little bit more helpful if you follow up with the phone call to the same person, of course. And if you say, hey, I'm this person from this team and I sent out this email. Did you receive it? I just want to follow up on what happened. And most likely what would have happened was that person saw your email, but just didn't have the time or they just forgot. And they'll be like, yeah, I was actually interested, but I just never got around to, actually responding back to you. And you can move forward from there. So, and when you're moving forward, phone calls and in person it's galaxy light faster than through email, because emails take a long time and it always gets forgotten, especially because companies are really busy. So make sure what works best for you. So kind of think about how you want to make that contact. Okay, and another part is thinking in shoes of the companies. So when you're making this contact, I think it does a little bit. It does a little good to kind of think about why a company might sponsor you, because then you get a very good understanding of what to say. And basically, I did say this a little bit in the beginning, but reasons for companies to sponsor an AUV team. First is because, well, it has to be related. It has to be related to AUV in some way or another. If you reach out to a company that's completely irrelevant, the chances are you're probably not going to get any support. But realistically, another reason for companies to sponsor an AUV team is through advertising. So, for example, if you look into the pictures provided here, you can see our team members kind of engaging in the local community, whether it's through outreach or whether it's through conference at the AUVSI. So this is a way, if you have a sponsorship and these companies are, basically championing this team, then as it's almost our obligation as students. We actually tell them that part of our benefits or perks of being a sponsor is that you're going to get significant exposure and exposure at these local communities. So in the left, this picture was us at the Smithsonian Museum. And if you're at a Smithsonian Museum, not only do you get a lot of kids, but you also get all various range of students. Of visitors, whether it's students, parents, or actual just some hobbyists or even just employees from different companies, be passing by. And it's a good way for companies to indirectly advertise their company. Also, if you look into the right picture, that's our team members at the AVSI conference. Again, if we have our banner set up, our vehicles showing all the companies on the LCD display, it's another really prime and a cost-effective way for a company to really do some immediate advertising that's very cheap for them. Another reason for a company to really want to support a student team is because branding and recruitment. Branding is a little different from recruitment because, say for example, if you do work in AV field and later on you go to a different company to work on more AV related stuff, and say you actually needed a specific part that you needed to um, advance your vehicle. And for you, you'll probably be thinking about what worked for you in the past. And if that meant kind of recalling back to that experience of using this donated sensor or part from your AV career in college, then you're going to be thinking about it and just be like, oh, I remember at that time when I used this product and really helped me out on my team. So now I'm on this company, let's purchase a bulk, maybe 1,000 of it. Because it worked for me, I know how to use it because I have that product familiarity, and in that way it's more of it's almost like an investment a company is making on a student. And lastly, recruitment is also a huge part. Especially this is more towards company university teams, especially towards upperclassmen who are towards the third or fourth year towards their college career. Basically, when companies' ideal employee are people who have experiences in the AUV field, or even experiences and familiarity in using their products. So if they support you and give you this in-kind donation, and you've already know how to use it, you know what works, what doesn't really work, and when you come to the company, then you know exactly how to improve the company. There's no training process, or there is, I guess, but there's there's minimal time for you to get um, familiar with the product because you've already used it before and you know the ins and outs of that product. And the last, I guess, stage of the acquiring sponsors is the follow-up stage. Basically, once you have received an item or a product that you're requesting for, and now you have developed this relationship, what do you do from there? And the thing is, of course, what do you do with any other relationship? Just because you're now Facebook friends with your friend doesn't mean you stop there, but you continue to make more grounds. You continue to develop that relationship. You got to nourish it. And the way you nourish that relationship with the company is by first, the immediate thing is to follow up on your agreement. When you reach out to these companies with a sponsorship packet, promising that if you give us this, we'll provide this much exposure, we'll give you this resume packet or whatnot. It's almost your obligation to follow up on that and give them what you promised, deliver them. I guess the next thing is when you do get this product to you delivered, and when it arrives, let them know that it has arrived. Give follow up with a thank you email to all the people that you may have engaged with, and I guess in a couple months afterwards, once you have actually integrated this product, or if you've been using this product for a while and then you finished the design cycle, or now you've even manufactured it, let them know. I mean, I think they're honestly kind of curious as to how student teams, especially AV teams, because there's not that many AV teams out there, how they're really using their product and how it's benefited your team. So make sure when you're updating them on your progress, it can be whether it's through your newsletters, just let them know how you're using it and how it's benefited you. Briefly speaking about newsletters, they're pretty helpful because you can send it out to your alumni, you can send it out to your companies who are sponsoring you, and just it's a good way to kind of it's a good channel to update everyone at once. And another company, especially companies who give hardware such as sensors, they will probably want some sort of feedback on terms of how you're integrating, how you're using that data. And because, I mean, companies always want some sort of feedback to constantly improve their products. So I guess we're almost being like the lab rats, and we're, if they're asking for, we want this kind of feedback and we want some sort of specific data report, they'll probably provide you with that specific frame or format that you need to follow. Provide them that as well, just because you're going to be probably using it, and they're much likely to like it. And at the end of the year, once the competition comes to an end, or when your design cycle comes to an end, just give every of your sponsors a general thank you letter with your team photo, and maybe the team leader signs on it. And it's a good way to, I think it's a pretty standardized etiquette of all sponsored organizations or companies to do this. And lastly, if you are one of the older members and have reached out and you have developed this relationship, and say you're about to graduate, make sure you pass along this relationship to a newer member on your team. This is very important because, again, the last thing you want to do is develop a really solid relationship for 3 to 4 years, and then suddenly this person on your team just leaves, and then that relationship is neglected, right? And then say the company is like, I haven't heard from these teams in a while. What's going on? Or are they even still in the AV competition? So make sure in order to prevent that from happening, if you're an older member and you're graduating, make sure all the people that you've been in charge of contact with, you pass it along to the younger member so they can continue that 3 to 4 years of working with that company. And again, um, one other key thing is have a very well documented list of all the companies that are sponsoring you. Just because it looks very unprofessional and almost looks kind of irritating if you don't know who are your sponsors, right? And you're requesting and your interactions with the company that's already has sponsored you is no different from a non-sponsored company. It just doesn't make any sense. So make sure your list of sponsorships is very well documented. So the things that you're probably going to need to include are the representative of that company, what they've actually provided you with, the contact date, when your product actually arrives, how much of the sponsorship it was. So, because I mean, this is very critical for you to determine what tier of sponsorship they fall under. And basically, yeah, those are the categories that you probably want to include in your well-documented sponsorship list. So make sure when all these are happening, I mean, this is basically kind of like, finance and budgeting of your team. No thing should be falling under the cracks, right? Because then that's very unprofessional and bad. So make sure nothing in terms of sponsorships, same thing applies. Make sure nothing falls under the cracks as well. Actually, this slide is just the stuff that I've been talking about regarding with feedbacks and newsletters. And again, I really emphasize having an organized and updated sponsorship list is very essential in order to making a very well, making a systemized kind of or established system of sponsorship activity in your team is the key way to do that is having everything very well documented. Because keep in mind, it might not just be the team leader who's working on acquiring sponsorship. It could be the business team, it could be the public relations team, or it could just be it could be any member who has more experience or has personal ties to that company. So the only way for everyone to be on the same page at the same time and share all the same information is if you have a well documented and updated sponsorship list. So the team leader or anyone who's making sure that this is happening, make sure this is done correctly. And also another key thing is if companies are visiting your school, whether it's because they're a donor to your university, or they're here for recruitment through a career fair, or if you're for internships, summer internships, jobs, recruitment, make sure you know who's coming, especially if it's a sponsor company that's coming. Make sure you reach out to them, say, hey, check out our lab, check out the progress we've been doing. We want to give you a feedback on how we've been using your items. That's a huge plus, and just be very attentive of all the opportunities available. Again, the key thing of making a sponsorship happen is by taking the initiative and being very opportunistic, and also by being very prepared. And lastly, another huge benefit for us, the student teams, for getting potential sponsorship, is that you're developing a relationship with this company, and say you're interested in working with this company. If you have already established a relationship, hey, that's a huge advantage that you have when you're interviewing with this team. Say, I've worked with this person, say like Bob or Fred in this company. He's the marketing director. I've already know how to use all his things that he provided us. He's actually a sponsor, And if you already have that kind of friendship or familiarity, personal ties developed, that'll give you a huge boost in terms of applying to a company that you want to work for. Because, hey, you're already using all their stuff, people already know you, why not? And I guess this is my last presentation, but so for teams who are, I guess, in the very early stage of their RoboSub experience, and also for high school teams who don't really have that many sponsors or are having a very low success rates in terms of acquiring sponsors, it might be better to try to acquire funds through other way rather than just straight to sponsor, because again, there is some sort of snowball effect in terms of acquiring sponsor. If you're at the very early stage, it's very hard to actually get the ball rolling. So here are other means of you to actually kind of receive some funds without having to depend on sponsorships. First is crowdfunding. Um, this is something that we did almost a year and a half ago now. But basically, we did a crowdfunding where every member on our team is responsible for 20 to 40 members of point of contact, and they just reach out to their friends, parents, cousins, or teachers that they knew, and just request for maybe like 20 to like $100 or $500, depending on how generous they are, and just to kind of support them. And it is basically like a crowdfunding source like Kickstarter or anything else. And we were actually quite surprised about how successful we were able to do, because even I think under a week, we allocated 30 days, but within a week, we raised $10,000. So if you need some quick cash to really move your team forward, this is I really recommend this channel. But another way to acquire funds is through your alumni network. If your team, I guess, hasn't been around for a long time, then kind of seek out what other teams in your school or in your local area, for teams that have already been around for a long time in your area. So that means if your school is well developed and they have a strong alumni network, reach out to them. One thing that we're trying to do in CAV is that by the end of our year, this is probably going to be our 16th year now of being established from 1999. So that means we're going to have a huge list of alumni already out there. And now, this is 16 years ago. That means if you're if you were on an AV team 16 years ago, that means by now you've made a lot of money because you're in your late 30s or maybe 40s. So if you reach out to them, that's another really good way to start getting funds for your team. Actually, I lied. This is my final slide. So final tips in terms of getting sponsorship: never send the wrong email. I mean, that's very intuitive, but it happens. Just as how you're applying to different college, for example, you never want to say, I want to go to, say, this school, but you're actually writing down some other school's name. That's a huge botchery, and you don't want to have that on you don't want to do that for your team, because that brings your team reputation down. Another thing is find the right sponsor. Don't just blindly shoot to like 100 different emails and spam everyone, but really spend some time, do your research, and find the right company that's most likely to sponsor you. And when you're asking for something, be very specific. If you just ask someone to help you, they're not going to want to help you unless you make it very easy for them to help you. And also be very specific about what kind of benefits they might be getting. Lastly, be very brief. And of course, be ready to follow up relentlessly, as in they might not be as easy as sending one email and then getting a sponsorship. You're going to have to follow up, maybe potentially even work up to a couple of months in terms of getting this. There's this one company that I've been trying to acquire sponsorship from since the beginning of September, and we're still in the process right now. And this doesn't mean that I haven't been sending out email like on a weekly basis, but it just things take time, and there's a lot of things that needs to be prepared on our ends and also on their ends to make sure things happen. So be ready to work on this. It's not an easy thing that happens overnight again. And my last thing I want to say is that, again, the whole $17 billion sponsorship available. A lot of other companies, a lot of other teams in AV, in the RoboSub, have a lot of sponsors, a lot. So why can't you? Right? And it's not because your team is less qualified or your team is less experienced, maybe, but it just means that I guess we've started on this and we've taken an earlier initiative to do so, and everyone is just as qualified to have the sponsorship availability. So with that encouraging note, I really recommend you to make this organized list of who you want to contact and just go at it. And I promise you, it's not that difficult. So that does conclude my webinar session. I'll take a quick minute to look through any questions that's come through. And looking through my email and spam as well, it seems like I have not received any questions for today. It's unfortunate, my heart is breaking, and I'm slowly starting to sob. But it's okay. If you have any other questions later on, you can still send them to me later on, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. All right, thanks for joining us. This will conclude the Acquiring Sponsorship webinar.